Hey guys, how you doing? How's it going? So today I thought I would take you on a little adventure into repair. That's right, a little fix and repair adventure. Many of you don't know that years ago, many years ago now, before my 21-year career in the security industry, I worked for a Toro organization. Toro being lawnmowers and power equipment group. They put out a bunch of power equipment still. I actually went to work for them as a driver, and then one winter it was really hard, and they were like, well, do you know how to fix anything? And I was like, yeah, I actually took a small engine repair course online. It was a correspondence course by Briggs & Stratton. Anyway, I took this course, a correspondence course, and I learned all about small engine and small engine repair. And then, in between jobs and stuff, I would occasionally go back to doing that on the side. And for a while, I had my own small engine repair, mobile small engine repair, kind of like fix as you go kind of thing. So a customer would have a problem, I'd drive out to their location, I'd fix their unit, and so I did that for a while. And it was actually good times. I actually found I missed doing that. And so that gets us to today's video. Today's video is taking a push mower that doesn't start. It's a relatively good looking unit, though the picture you'll see of it makes it look like it's been around the block and left for dead. But it still looks good, and it still looks good. So I decided, why not fix this thing? It shouldn't take too much to do it. And what do you think? You wanna help me fix a push mower? So I thought the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna start with finding out if the thing pull starts. If it pull starts, we know it's got spark. If it pull starts, we know it's got fuel, because we're gonna check that too, but we know it's getting fuel. If it doesn't pull start, the question is, okay, is it getting spark? And the easiest way to answer, is it getting spark, is to remove our spark plug and balance that on the frame. But I thought I would take a cheater break and grab some carb cleaner and spray it directly into the carb. And if it starts up with a carb cleaner and runs and dies, which it should, that would tell us that it's a carburetor issue. Carburetor issue means that we've got to clean the carb, and not only clean the carb, but we probably ought to put a carb kit in it. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you. That's usually what it takes, and I went ahead and ordered a carb kit ahead of schedule, because that's what you do. You plan ahead. So since most lawn mowers are left out, they're left out with gas in them, and most gas contains ethanol. Ethanol gums up lawnmower carburetors. So if your lawnmower refuses to start and you put it away from winter and you put some gas additive, you probably didn't put enough gas additive in it, and your carburetor got gummed up. So that's usually 90% of all small mower fixes that homeowners have, because if you're going to bring that small lawnmower to a shop, it's probably going to cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of $100, and you can buy most of these yard mowers from Home Depot and places like that for, $150 at the most, maybe $200 at most for buying the top of the line one. But just a cheap one to beat around the yard, you're probably going to spend $125. So instead of, I hate to say this, instead of fixing the mower, most people put them to the curb with a free sign on them. And people like me, who need a secondary income, or an actual income at all, in the middle of the countryside, can find these things and bring them back and get them tuned up and running and sold and make a little profit. So with that said, we're gonna go ahead and crank on this push mower, and if it doesn't start, then we're going to find out why, and then from there, if it starts and it runs and dies on carburetor cleaner, we're going to overhaul the carb. So let's get at it, shall we? It's a Murray, and it is a Select 22-inch, and it's powered by a Briggs & Stratton, easy to work on, 4.5 horse. SQ, I guess. And here's a cat. to be able to do this job, you got to have a cat. So it does have the traditional primer bulb, and it does have a easy to check gas tank. So the first thing we do is we check it. Does it have gas? You can't see in there, but it does. Has clean gas in there by the looks and smell of it. And then we have our air cleaner here that we're going to have to do. And the first question on this little guy here, which is a little cleaned up, is will it start? So let's find out. Let's see. Alright, for this mission, besides a cat, as you can see, making a star of the show, you're going to need yourselves, okay, you don't really need a cat, but it helps. You're going to need some carb cleaner, and you're going to need a flat screwdriver, and you're going to need about a 1/2 inch, I think it is. Might even need a 9/16 or 3/8, depending on the unit you're working on. And let's get into it. So number one, the very first thing you're going to have to do is take off this air cleaner. We know it's not starting, so the question is, why is it not starting? Now, we could check the spark. We could go through the extra step of checking the spark, which is a warranted idea. We know that I did. It's got clean fuel in it because I actually cheated, and the primer bulb does work, so we can actually see. It's a little slow, but it works. And we pull off the air cleaner. So let's back out, pull off the air cleaner, and it's a little dirty. It's not bad though. I mean, this isn't going to keep this unit from running. And we see that the carburetor's a little dirty, but this shouldn't keep this thing from running. So what we'll do is we'll hit it one more time. Make sure that's working. I don't know if you can see that. You'll see the jet of fuel. See that? All right. So we know that fuel is no longer the issue. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take some carb cleaner, touch it off in there, and then if it starts, runs, and dies, then we're going to know. All right, so coming back, we get ourselves, as I throw it on the ground, it's hard to do with one hand, but we got ourselves our carb cleaner. In this case, I'm using gum out. And we're going to actually touch a little bit off in here. And then we're going to go ahead and pull this cord and see if it runs and dies. So let's do that. Alright guys, so we know we got to go ahead and get the carburetor and gas tank assembly off. We're going to do that by starting out with the 9/16 on getting this bolt here. And as we see, we're going ahead and loosening it up. It's pretty easy. It comes out relatively quickly, as you see here. We're going to toss this bolt down here on the deck, the pan, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to go over here and we have one more attaching the carburetor gas tank assembly to the frame. We're going to go ahead 3/8 this. It's just a wrench, loosen it up, and we're going to go ahead and back this one out just like we did the last one. Takes relatively no time at all. Tossing this down onto the pan, and now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at this assembly. You see this spring right here, these two springs together. We want to be very careful when removing the gas tank carburetor assembly from the frame because we don't want to damage those springs. If you do, you got to get new ones or bend them back in place. So you gently wiggle it back and forth, very gently pulling away from the mower itself, but doing it very gently. Again, I can't stress this enough because you don't want to bend or break those springs. You'll have to get another kit. So once we get this down, we can actually see that the two springs are still connected. Normally you could just bend this up and this whole assembly, like tip your gas tank up and pull it off, but as you see, I did it by hand. I pulled it off. We're done. Now we get the carburetor on the bench, the carburetor gas tank assembly, that is, and we have to separate the carburetor from the gas tank. And this is done very easy by loosening with a Phillips head screwdriver these 4 or 5 screws. They're Phillips head in this case, and they come off pretty easy. You might have to put a little bit of torque to get them off, but you can actually go ahead and do that. And as you see here, once they got them going, well, I think you know how a screwdriver and screws work. So we're probably going to fast forward past the rest of these and get us right into the midst of things. Now, what I tend to do is I tend to, after I get the screws all loosened up, I tend to then gently lift the carburetor off of the gas tank. And again, you got to be careful because there's some other parts that you can't see, which is a pickup tube inside the gas tank, and you don't want to bend or break that. So the screws here are all loosened up, and I'm lifting the carburetor off, and as you see, it wants to catch because that's where the housing is for it. So you got to be careful with that pickup tube and gently twist off, then pops off. And that's pretty easy. That's pretty much how you get that carburetor off. And we'll go ahead and take the bolts, get those out of the way, or in this case the screws rather, and I'll show you the carburetor. As you see here, you got some places that could get gummed up pretty easy. You got a spring, you got the pickup tube, which is the long thing, and then you got also a fuel flow area. So I pulled the diaphragm and gasket off. They generally come off together unless you have to scrape or pry them off because of how long it's been sitting out in the elements. And as you see here, this one's pretty it's not good, and the reason why it's bubbled up in one place so the fuel isn't flowing properly. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab our carb cleaner. In this case I'm using gum out, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to hit all the places we can in the carburetor. We're going to hit every single place. We're going to first wash it all down, and then we're going to hit every single place that we can. Literally every place that you can possibly hit, you will. And so what I've done is I pulled off the screen here, and I'm hitting the screen. There's a small little screen on the side there, and I pulled that off, and I'm hitting that, and now I'm going ahead, examining what I want to hit next. And you want to hit the pretty much everything. There's a bunch of little ports in there that you want to use your carburetor cleaner on, and there's anywhere it's open and anywhere where crud can get in. You really want to give this thing a good bath, and it's really important to make sure that carburetor is as clean as you can get it, even in here, even over in here. Here's the flapper area. You want to make sure that there's an O-ring in there. You want to make sure that O-ring is there. Sometimes it comes off and stays on the mower and you have to pop it back in, but you want to hit that whole area there too with carburetor cleaner as best you can. I mean, you can use a parts washer. I just use a can of carb cleaner. Works great. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to set the carb cleaner aside for a moment, and we're going to take a look at the gas tank, and the top of the gas tank, that is, because there's an important part to this that I don't think a lot of people realize. I'm pointing with the screwdriver here into this little hole. That is where the fuel's flowing around, and basically down in the bottom of that gets a lot of sediment and a lot of water sometimes and gunk, and you really want to give that a dose of carburetor cleaner. I know it seems repetitive. Everything I say when it comes to the gas tank and the carburetor is hit it with carburetor cleaner, but it really is true. There's a bunch of little jets, also little holes that go into the gas tank, just like there is with the carburetor. You want to make sure you get each and every single one of those holes, and then I take a little bit of paper towel and I put that down in there and I soak up the carburetor cleaner. You don't have to, but I do it just to make sure I get all the sediment out of the bottom of that, where that screen sits, that filter sits, and sucks that gas through. So now that we've got that done, we go back to the carburetor. Does the flapper flap, so to speak? So that choke the choke flapper, does it actually do what it's supposed to do, slide back and forth with no restriction? If it doesn't, you're going to need to do something with it. And now I go back and I'm pointing out some of the other little holes that you can get that straw in that comes on the carburetor cleaner spray. So we grab our part here, and this is the diaphragm and gasket kit. It's a genuine part for Briggs & Stratton. It's a pretty common part. Most places have it. And you go ahead and tear this sucker open and grab the gasket and the diaphragm. Now the diaphragm has to go on first. I can't stress this enough. The diaphragm itself must go on first. If you don't put it on first and you put it on second, the carburetor is not going to work the way that it's supposed to. So the diaphragm has to go on first and the gasket goes on top. There is only one way that these parts will line up on that tank. So that's actually really cool by Briggs & Stratton, how they made these parts specifically. If you put them on the right way, they can only go on one way. And so it may take a moment to line those holes up, because you do have to line the holes up. And essentially, like I said, you put that diaphragm down first, and then you put the gasket on top, and then you line those holes up. Sometimes they use a pick, a screwdriver, a screw, just to get the holes lined up. Now you see I'm going ahead and I'm putting the carburetor back on. I'm being careful not to bend the pickup tube. And I get it on, I grab a screw, and oh wait, I made a mistake. Yep, I forgot a part. I look down and there's my screen. So I gotta lift the carburetor back off the gas tank and put the screen on. I partially did this to demonstrate how easy it is to forget the screen. And if you forget that screen and you start up that mower and it sucks up a small piece in there, forget about it. Your carburetor will probably shut down. So now we're all good. I got my gas tank back, or my carburetor back on my gas tank. I'm being careful to line up the holes. Again, I may use a screwdriver or a pick or something to make sure that that those holes actually line up. And that's the tricky part, because you have to have the gasket and diaphragm lined up or those screws will not do what they're supposed to. So I go ahead and I thread my screws in by hand. This is very important, because that way you know you're not cross-threading a screw and causing a bigger problem, and suddenly a $5 part issue becomes a $20 or $30 part issue. I'm using my Phillips head screwdriver and I'm tightening these back down, not all the way, leaving them somewhat loose until I get them all in. And now that they're all in, now I'm tightening them down. You don't want to over tighten or strip these out. You want to get them tight, but not too tight. Let's get back out to the mower. So now that we got our carburetor kit all installed, we're going to bring this back out. I'm going to attach the linkage first, because it's much easier to attach the linkage or detach the linkage with the tank slightly off. And this piece right here goes into the flapper, and then the other piece I'm not going to be able to show you attaches to the flapper itself on the carburetor. So now that that's on, you're going to gently rock it into place, and it might be a little tricky to do one-handed, but I made it happen. And you're going to gently rock it back on, rock it back into place, but you want to be very careful that those springs don't get bent or this little rubber boot get torn. Then you got to get another part. In this case, you want to make sure you grab it on there, you slide it on there, everything's good, which it is. And now I'm grabbing my front bolt, and it doesn't matter, you could put the back one in first, but I'm grabbing my front one, and I'm going ahead and again threading them by hand to start with, just to make sure I'm not going to cross thread nothing and then have to find another bolt or maybe do a tap and die issue. I grab the other one, the one that bolts it to the frame itself, and again threading it by hand, getting it all the way in there by hand before grabbing a tool, because in this case, you want to make sure it's on, which it is. Everything's good. Now I grab my socket, and I go ahead and grab my 9/16 socket, and I'm just going ahead and tightening this thing back down. Again, you don't want to over tighten them, because if you do, you'll strip them out. But yep, I got it in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit more. Takes a moment, you gotta get that thing on there, but I was wondering why it wasn't threading properly, which it was. It just was not pushed in far enough when I started it. So now I went ahead and grabbed my 3/8, and I'm going to go ahead and just tighten this one back on. And again, you don't want to over tighten them, you don't want to under tighten them. Now, we got to go ahead and we got to put our air filter back on, and we're going to go and do that again, starting it by hand before torquing it with a screwdriver, making sure it seats properly. And now I'll go ahead and again, same thing as before, you don't want to over tighten. If you over tighten, you'll strip stuff, and then you have to get more parts. So being careful not to strip it, tighten it. You tighten it all the way down till it stops, and then you give it like maybe a little bit more. So now I'm going to go ahead and fire this thing off. You with me? Let's find out. And that's pretty much it to getting this unit up and functional. There is a couple of things else that I'm going to mention here really quickly before giving this thing a little bit of a test. And that's that if this was your mower and it was the end of season, what I would do is I would fire it off, and I would put something like a rag or something around this brake, and then I would let it run out of gas. I would let the mower run out of gas versus getting stable fluid and then having to mix that and maybe getting the improper mixture and gumming up your fuel. That's really what I would do. With this particular mower, there's not really much else that needed to be done with putting a carb kit on it. As you see, there will be some cleanup effort put into it, and maybe a little bit of paint on this and on there. That's really it. Checking to see if the wheels are tightened. And then the other thing that I would do with this thing is I would do the oil change, which I'm not gonna lie, I cheated and already beat you to it. So I did an oil change. I was actually looking at this more earlier, as I said. So, but that's really all that needs to be done to make this thing a functional mower. Doing the deck, cleaning out the deck and sharpening the blade, that's for a different episode. I don't need to do that with this one. I already know the condition of the blade is good on this one. But I just wanted to really show you that. So let's put this thing on the handle and fire it off and let it run. The other thing I'll tell you with these Briggs & Stratton, they're pretty simple and they're pretty basic, but you probably should do what they say. So when it comes to priming this thing, even though it was just running, they say prime it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. They say to prime it 3 times all the time. I would do that. Otherwise you'll pull about 3 or 4 or 5 times. But let's crank this thing up and see what it sounds like here. Maybe. I'm not really sure how to show this to you. Hang on. So there you go. That's really all you have to do to get your mower going back. Again, lastly, for service, I would recommend sharpening the blade each and every season at the start. You can service the blade at the end of every season, but definitely you want to go into the mowing season having a clean deck, but you definitely want to have a sharp blade. You definitely want to change the oil every year, and you want to make sure, primarily, the biggest thing is that the deck, every time you mow like wet grass or whatever, is scraped out clean. I don't have to do it on this one. I already did it before, and that's for a different video. But I just wanted to show you 90% of most of these push mowers that you're going to own, generally speaking, it's going to be because you gummed up the carburetor by leaving gas in it all winter. That's really it. If you run the gas out, you know that when you hit the next mowing season, you're not going to have anything in there. You spray a couple dabs of your carb cleaner in there, and then you put fresh gas in, and you should be good to go. Like I said, these things are pretty indestructible. So that was a carb kit for you. Straightforward. Wouldn't start before. Starts fine now. Runs pretty good. You saw it. Running wide open there. I'll do future videos if you like it. If I get enough people saying do more of these, I'll do more of these. So up to you. Let me know. All right. Till next time. See you later. And go tune up your lawnmower. Don't just throw it out. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and see you later.